Hi everyone, welcome back to our channel, Sumsub for Experts. Today we have a very special guest. Her name is quite famous in the area of compliance, anti-money laundering. Hi Denisse.
Hi Tony.
Denisse, you are a CEO at Rudich Advisory, research fellow at Royal United Services Institute, RUSI, non-executive director at Relio, senior policy advisor at the Sentry, and co-founder at Elementary B. So you wear, I would say, a considerable amount of hats. Could you please describe somehow all these hats? Maybe you can skip any if you want, but just to make sure that we all know your very versatile experience.
Thank you. So I have what some people could describe as a portfolio career, but at the heart of it, I am a specialist in financial crime prevention, and I love the idea of knowledge sharing and co-creation and collaboration. So Rudich Advisory is the firm that I started in 2013, and specifically I provide strategic advisory services to a variety of different clients. So banks, neobanks, crypto firms, regulators, governments, international organizations, et cetera, and civil society as well. So, and the whole idea really is to promote financial integrity with as much kind of upskilling as possible. I suppose, I don't know if my superpower is to be able to translate, very high level policy initiatives into day-to-day kind of operational realities. So I help my clients try to do that. RUSI is so the Center of CFCS, so the Center for Financial Crime Studies, basically creates an incredible amount of research in the space of illicit financial flows and explores policy options and how to make the world a bit of a harder place to launder money and for corrupt regimes to continue to operate. So it's wonderful being part of that family. So I do wear many hats. All of my various people that I work with are aware that I wear many hats, but it does allow me to have a kind of cross-system perspective of financial crime prevention, and also to be able to either take a top-down or bottom-up approach, depending on whatever it is that my clients need to have.
You also are engaged in the work of the G7 and G20. That's very interesting as well. Could you tell us a bit about this part of your activities?
So I am director of the G7 and the G20 research groups here in London. I have been a member of the research group for going on 22 years now, so quite a long time. I went to my first summit in 2001.
G7 obviously is a very active player in the, let's say, market of international regulation of finance, because it includes the most powerful countries, most developed, most civilized countries, some of which are known as enablers of global money laundering. But at the same time, I have read quite recently on the RUSI website a material which is authored by Tom Keating and Maria Nazero. And in this article, they actually heavily criticized G7 for being unable to make the serious progress in curbing corruption and money laundering. That they even compared these activities with the Groundhog Day, and saying that some of the commitments, for example, the commitment to ensure beneficial ownership transparency, is just going back and forth from one communique to another each year and just copy it word by word, and nothing really happens. How do you see the perspectives of the G7 involvement in the policy making in the sphere of anti-money laundering?
What's interesting about the G7, people hear the name, the G7, and they think, is it an international organization? Is it a global institution? What is it? So actually it is a kind of, it is neither. It does not have a secretariat. It doesn't have institutional memory. And basically every year a group of 7 countries come together and the torch gets passed from one country to another. And it really is down to the host country to determine what is going to be the priority, or what are going to be the priorities for the year. So beneficial ownership transparency has been coming and going since 2013. I think the first mention of it was at the Lockern Summit when David Cameron was Prime Minister, and it was seen as a way of tackling tax evasion and illicit financial flows. And yes, you do see the language coming up time and again in different contexts. So last year it was under the umbrella of environmental crime in Cornwall as part of I think it was the home meetings of the ministers of security, of national security. You have seen it in the finance minister work stream, you've seen it in the foreign minister's work streams, or kind of light references either to beneficial ownership or the need to tackle illicit financial flows, or some kind of related theme. What I would say about the G7 is that it's a way of basically setting the global policy agenda. And when you have that many countries agreeing on the need to make something happen, it might take a while because countries have national laws and legislations, and they have to, draft new laws and put it through their own legislative processes. And sometimes it takes a while for that to happen. So beneficial ownership transparency has been around for a long time, but I think we've definitely seen more traction in the space. The EU has adopted, requirements around beneficial ownership transparency. The overseas crown territories and dependencies have committed to having public beneficial ownership registries. The US is working on it, and it might not necessarily be public the way that we want it to be public. But it's the G7. It set up the Financial Action Task Force in 1989 to tackle drug trafficking.
Yes.
And they are responsible for the world that we work in, that we live and work in. And the FATF, the Global Anti-Money Laundering Standards Setter, they get tasked by the G7 and by the G20 to kind of focus on different areas. And actually, the most kind of impactful area that we've seen recently is when they were tasked with looking at how to bring in virtual assets within scope of anti-money laundering legislation. So that happened in 2018, and by 2022, so again, it was about 4 years. The standards were updated, risk assessments have been carried out, and countries are slowly, starting to adopt laws and regulations in this space. So I do, because I have monitored it for so long, I do see impact, but it does feel like the tortoise moving forward. So we'll get to that finish line, but it takes a while.
In the EU, there was an open data directive, which was suggested as a draft, and it was supposed to enter into force 1 year ago, but it never actually came into force, and it still is just a draft directive. And we have some commentaries, for example, from Chris Taggart of Open Corporates. He was saying bluntly that he was very angry about the situation that is happening right now in Europe, even in Europe, with the open beneficial ownership registers, saying that only basically Denmark and Ukraine are European countries that actually opened up beneficial ownership registers, but others do not do this. And so anti-money laundering activity is usually called as a cat and mouse game, but it seems that sometimes cat and mouse are playing on one and the same team. So maybe we can feel the problem in motivation in most of the European countries to open up registries. I would add here one more element, which is that we have offshore jurisdictions. Most of the offshore jurisdictions are more or less dependent on, for example, UK or the US. Some of them are not, but still. And we still have some secretive approaches there in terms of beneficial ownership. And this means that when you have basically the whole idea of anti-money laundering procedures without ascertaining who is the beneficial owner of this or that entity is not achieved. How do you see, where are we going, and is there at least some light somewhere at the end of the tunnel? How would you comment this situation?
So I would like to think that we're going towards more transparency and beneficial ownership. However, as you pointed out, even within the EU, which is, the directive has been set by the European Union. Every 27 countries are required to have kind of beneficial ownership registries. It's different. It's a little bit hit and miss. Global Witness issued a report last year that actually brought up some of the issues that they identified with transparent and public beneficial ownership registries, and that included, having paywalls, or the registries only being accessible by citizens of the country, or only being searchable by a tax reference number,
yes.
et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, again, this is one of the biggest challenges with global initiatives is the need to implement them at a domestic level in line with local laws, customs, documentation available, and also kind of the domestic political will to drive these initiatives forward. Yeah. So I think there's definitely been some progress made. The fact that the U.S. is even has even agreed to have a beneficial ownership registry, regardless of the caveats around it, at least it does make it available for law enforcement, or the purpose of a lot of AML activity is to be able to bring action against criminals, and to identify and prevent the international financial system from being misused. So if we can in some way find the evidence to bring before a court of law, then I think that's a good positive step forward. England was one of the biggest proponents of beneficial ownership transparency, and it has taken so long for the legal process to be finished, but then also the need to bring in new technology and the public tenders and how to organize the data, and so it has been it has been a long time coming as well.
One of the traditional instruments to curb money laundering and to kind of influence certain specific countries that are not as good at anti-money laundering procedures is grey listing by FATF. And we see that there are many countries that actually were grey listed by FATF at a certain moment, and they changed their approaches, their policies. They kind of cured, and they went off the list. For example, Malta, a quite recent example, we saw a lot of effort on the side of Malta, and they went out. Now they are, I guess, the main beneficiary when we saw Gibraltar on the list. So right now they're taking some businesses on their territory. It's a good example of an instrument which can really draw a country on some next level in terms of anti-money laundering procedures. But on the other hand, we have an example of UAE and Turkey that have been relisted, but it seems that nothing has changed for them really, and UAE is still one of the largest international finance centers, and Turkey. By the way, Turkey just quite recently have adopted a law in accordance with which all cash and all monies that are coming into the country are free from the obligation to provide the proof of source of funds, proof of source of wealth, until March 2023, something like that. It was a very strange way how this law was passed, last minute amendment to some kind of a bill which was not connected with this issue. So Turkey is just showing that, Iran PEPs, Russian PEPs, you can launder money through our banks. So my bottom line of this question is that does it mean that really this FATF grey listing doesn't really work for some countries that are big enough to remain on their places in terms of international finance infrastructure, and so it's not really functioning.
The fat of gray list. Any gray list, any country gray list is always, it's a very kind of contentious and can be kind of, somewhat potentially challenging process to get on the list and review what's on. I mean, I remember what happened with the EU original high-risk country list, and it had to be removed, and a new process and methodology had to be developed. So the IMF did a study a couple of years ago, maybe last year, that basically found that by being black or gray listed, not blacklisted, by being put on the FATF gray list, it costs around 7%, the equivalent of around 7% GDP in terms of loss of capital inflows. So that is a significant amount of money coming into a country, right? And especially if you're a country and you want to grow and you want to provide for your people, et cetera, you being on the blacklist. I mean, nobody wants to be on not the blacklist, the gray list. Also, nobody wants to be on the blacklist, although some countries wear it as a badge of honor. So there are a lot of kind of processes that aren't really made public in terms of kind of what happens when a country's put on the gray list. The FATF, from my understanding, is that the FATF agrees to an action plan with a particular country, and then if that country is meeting the terms of the action plan in line with agreed timelines, then there is a possibility of the country being removed from the gray list. It is difficult to understand how countries get put on the list. I think all to say that the FATF is, every country that is a member of the FATF has an obligation to require their countries to apply, or their financial institutions and regulated entities to apply enhanced measures such as enhanced due diligence and enhanced monitoring on transactions and customers that are, in countries or linked to countries on the gray list. And it definitely is worthwhile keeping that in mind if you are setting up your anti-money laundering program. In conclusion, but also look at your national country list, and also look at like your regional country list if you're in Europe and such a list exists.
There are some crypto exchanges that are really big ones that are actually allowing some of their customers trading and even withdrawing crypto, and I think even fiat. I'm not sure about that, but crypto for sure, without real verification. So they either just collect information, let's say name, surname, date of birth, without verification, or they even just verify only, let's say, email. But it seems that still we have maybe out of top 10 largest crypto exchanges, half of them are still not having, let's say, a proper KYC procedures. They're also offering their services through offshore companies quite often. Is Elliptic? There's a famous report which is done by Elliptic on preventing crime in crypto assets, financial crime in crypto assets. And so in this report, they're saying that, of course, when a crypto exchange is not having a real KYC procedure, this crypto exchange should be red flagged. This means that you basically, you're not supposed to work with such a crypto exchange. If you have some incoming transaction from this crypto exchange, this transaction should be considered red flagged, high risk, and you cannot put this inside of your secure infrastructure, and let them go through. So this means that. And again, Elliptic shows that the typical way of money laundering is when you have some illicit money goes first to some unregulated crypto exchange, and then from this unregulated crypto exchange it goes to a normal, legit crypto exchange, and then out of it, it goes to a bank account as a fiat money already. So how exactly then it is possible to work with these large crypto exchanges that do not have a real compliant KYC procedures?
So
what would you answer?
I think I can see where Liptic is coming from, especially if these large regulated exchanges are legally required to have in place KYC and due diligence measures because of where they're offering services into or where they're physically based or operating. So again, I mean, if you're sending money from a black box to a black box, then it makes it very easy to, launder the proceeds of crime or, criminal funds, especially if you don't have blockchain monitoring software in place, right? However, ultimately, you don't know the source of funds or the source of value that's being transferred.
Yes.
And that in any kind of, even, we use cash still. I still do have cash. Sometimes I'm a child of plastic and I do have my crypto wallets and whatnot. And yes, I say wallets. And I remember how surprised that I was at how easy it is to set up a wallet on some exchanges. As well, especially in the decentralized world, thinking, wow, I could have like 6 or 7 of these if I wanted to, because nobody would really check or shut them down. So it's the lack of being able to understand where the value has come from. And for example, you might actually be receiving funds, or if you're selling an NFT or some sort of virtual product, or even a product, but accepting or commodity, whatever it is that you want, but accepting money from a wallet that hasn't been validated or verified or subject to KYC, you don't know where the money is coming from. You don't know who the person that is sending you the funds is, and you don't know their affiliations. So you might actually be receiving proceeds, dealing with people that you, in the real world, wouldn't really be dealing with. And it's your personal responsibility to figure out how to manage that, because you don't have an intermediary who's doing the KYC on your behalf, right? So you yourself could actually be committing a crime. And so in terms of how to manage the exchanges, I think, definitely in terms of higher risk and understanding their processes and their procedures, their compliance culture, how they train their employees, and kind of what additional measures they have in place, and possibly doing a little bit more enhanced monitoring on the transactions, or just, if you choose to continue doing business with an exchange that is legally required to have KYC processes in place, but doesn't.
Now, if you are in crypto business, we have actually quite good news for you. First of all, we have just developed a subtype of our KYC solution specifically designed for crypto businesses. With this solution, you can scale up in virtually any area worldwide. You can create various verification flows, multiple verification flows depending on the area. You can make the procedure much more customer friendly, and eventually you can scale up and make the procedure easier, more user friendly, more speedy, and make the conversion rates much better. Some of our clients, such as Binance and Bybit, have already implemented this solution in their verification procedures and accelerated the approval time to just 50 seconds. Second of all, our reusable KYC system. In this KYC system, if you use it with your partners, you can actually reduce the time to verify your customers to just a couple of seconds without necessarily checking their ID documents and passports. Some of our clients, for example, Mercurio, are very happy about this solution and tell that their approval rates and their conversion is getting up to stars. And thirdly, we have prepared new guides and new pieces of research for you, so visit our website and check it out. Thank you very much. Another thing that was quite interesting for me to ask you, especially because you are, you are kind of like going back and forth in the realm of politics and policies of the next day, is the verification of address. It's a common pain everywhere because, I mean, for that usually you need a utility bill or bank statement, and in some countries it will be a problem to get them for various reasons. What do you think about this? Like, how? I mean, obviously in the in the world of technology, verifying address based on utility bill, paper-based utility bill, is kind of a crazy situation. There should be something to replace this.
Oh, I think in terms of okay, so I think from earlier this year, I was part of a tech sprint, a female empowerment tech sprint, and we were trying to come up with different ways to verify identity for women who were either victims of domestic abuse, generally, or women or men or children who were victims of domestic abuse, to allow them to be able to access financial services. So quite often, the fact that they can't verify their address or their identity acts as a barrier. And actually, I worked with this incredible group of women who came up with a solution of creating a wallet, basically a digital wallet, or putting it on blockchain that would accept different forms of verification of identity, not necessarily just address. So whether it was, for example, the doctor confirming that this person is who they said they were, whether it's the children's school confirming that this is a parent who was, originally had registered address here. In some countries around the world, not just in Africa, you might either have a PO box address, which doesn't quite make sense. I remember I was in Ireland trying to get, in Ireland, Democratic Republic of Ireland within the EU, not that long ago, trying to kind of get an address to send a group of people to go to. And it was like, well, it's the stone owned by the Morse or the O'Shaughnessy's, second right on, second turn to the left. And I was like, well, what's the address? And this they just kept repeating the same thing, and it hadn't actually been given a physical address, right? So how do you validate that? And this is like, again, where local knowledge comes in. So I think there's definitely something that we can do with a combination of technology, whether it's kind of geolocation and kind of the triangulation of geolocation, whether it's geolocation of device or your IP address or your physical address, satellite imagery, et cetera. But again, there's also data privacy considerations to be taken into account as well. So I think we still have a bit of a ways to go before we can convince regulators and legislators that we should get rid of utility bills and maybe electronic utility bills, or actually building a utility with self-sovereign identity where somebody kind of validates, a certification body is able to validate somebody's address based on information they have given, or I don't know. There are options.
Do you believe that there are totally DeFi projects? The problem is that, for example, you have a decentralized project, and based on this FATF guidance and the laws that have been written based on this guidance, for example, in Estonia, the whole idea is that if you are sure that you are a DeFi project, then it's fine. Be a DeFi project. But if there is at least some suspicion that you are not a DeFi project, then you have to carry out KYC procedures, etc., etc. And if you carry out KYC procedures, then you're definitely not a DeFi project. That's the main problem there.
The catch-22 problem
the
right
first
there.
question is what to do with this. As an advisor, how would you handle this issue?
So DeFi, again, I have heard, there's a significant amount of investment that's going into DeFi, into the DeFi space, and creating new ways of providing financial services without an intermediary, right? Using SOFR protocols and smart contracts, et cetera. In terms of, I think the first piece of advice that I would say is not necessarily to look at the DeFi element of the project, but more at the financial element, or the decentralized element of the product, but more at the financial element of the product, to identify if you are creating something that is regulated under kind of laws, national laws and regulations, and if you are creating a loan or certain kinds of products that would traditionally qualify as a financial product, then that's something to be considered because at that point in time you might be subject to regulation and registration, and then at that point in time you might already be subject to anti-money laundering requirements because you become a financial kind of potential entity. In terms of how to meet your anti-money laundering compliance requirements, I think there's still an element of innovation that could be built into, just like you can have smart contracts without intermediaries. I wonder if there's a world where you could execute KYC and monitoring, et cetera, without, using a smart contract or something along those lines. I don't know if this is just kind of blue skies thinking. I'm sure that there are people that are already working on, like self-sovereign identity and the like. In terms of what you just said about, the FATF guidance and Estonia, I think it needs to be taken because it's such a new, it's a potential, it's disruption that's happening in financial markets. I think it needs to be taken project by project by project. And any advisor needs to understand who are the key players, where's the code, where is the code held, what jurisdiction, right, as well as the code held, where is the data flow, where are the data flows going, what can be monitored, what cannot be monitored, who is benefiting from different things. Again, is it truly decentralized or not decentralized?
Yes.
And then start going from there. So I think
that's actually also a good niche. It's a good niche for advisory, I guess, to make this legal opinions. You are not a DeFi, or you are a DeFi. We consider you a DeFi. Based on the fact that your code is on GitHub.
I mean, it is a very again. It's not a black and white answer, right? It's new. It's new.
The thing which is related to DeFi projects, obviously, and you have mentioned this, self-sovereign solutions, zero knowledge solutions. One of them is right now we hear at least that Circle is trying to do something, and there's Zealand's also one of these projects. They're trying to build, let's say, consortiums in which most of the crypto exchanges and DeFi projects would partner and share basically the same KYC infrastructure. The main problem here is when it comes to zero knowledge, the problem is that there is a conflict between zero knowledge and data retention policy, which is in any AML regulation, and so you have to retain documents and information about each client, and then this means that zero knowledge doesn't work
unless you have a token and there's some sort of a timestamp that allows you to then be able to kind of get the data that was captured by whoever was providing one side of the puzzle to validate the information, and you have the right to be able to extract that data at some point in time. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, but then the problem is that then you have a data problem. If you have an end customer who provides the information, the PII or KYC information to a KYC provider who will validate this information, and then to provide, let's say, a zero knowledge confirmation to any regulated entity, then the problem is, there are actually two problems. One problem is that then this means that KYC provider is a service provider for the end customer and not the obliged entity. And the second problem is that the obliged entity doesn't have this information, and so it cannot take an informed decision based on the risk-based approach in respect of this. So there are a bunch of problems, and I hope that somebody will discuss these problems with FATF and the regulators, because it seems that right now we have this hindrance, we have this stone on the ground, which does not let us go further with innovation. And this stone is basically a combination of GDPR and current requirements of AML laws, and we cannot go further because of that. Do you agree or not?
Definitely, there's a lot of benefit to be had with putting technologists in the room with regulators, and
Yes.
people who can kind of translate between the two, if that makes sense.
Yes.
And actually, there's a fantastic organization called an Alliance for Innovative Regulation, which is actually looking at working. They're a philanthropic organization. A lot of them are actually ex-regulators from the UK, from the US. They work with regulators around the world, trying to see how they can actually promote the use of technological innovation and help regulators kind of, I mean, I'm not going to say that this is their modus operandi. This is how I understand what it is that they do. Kind of help regulators move forward in allowing for the evolution of kind of not just regulatory technology, but also regulation that is innovation friendly. So there is some work going out there, policy, but also kind of innovation in itself to try not just with anti-money laundering and whatnot. I get your point around GDPR. GDPR is a frustration for many, specifically with some of the things that have to do with law enforcement activity as well, and some of the challenges that it's posing for law enforcement authorities and their ability to keep us safe and do their jobs. But yeah, I think definitely, the fact of, with the last presidency, one of their priorities was looking at innovation and looking at technology and how technology could be used to make the fight against anti-money laundering much more efficient. So I don't know if I can say like it seems like there could be an open door for people to be part of the public-private policy groups, to feed into any consultations that are being had, especially if you understand how the technology works and are able to explain it and are able to identify the challenges with the technology, the loopholes, but then also how you close those down. And the way that you described it, I mean, you seem like one of those people. So I would say go and talk to the FATF.